All right, welcome to the sixth virtual meeting. I think this is the first time we have a Rotary meeting in Ramadan. We usually have Ghabgas, but since the situation, I thought it would be great to have a meeting during Ramadan so people can interact with each other. So I thought we'd continue this, and as the survey, everybody 90% said yes to continue meetings during Ramadan. And Zain, just to update everyone, Seema will not be able to chair the meeting today. She has a art lab or something going on. Khalid Turk said he's also in a meeting. So I'll just, to make things easier, I'll just chair the meeting today. So give me a second. I will upload this. I prepared a virtual agenda. Where did I put it? Good. I think everyone can see that. So welcome everyone. We recently completed a project with the Telugu Kala Samathi Bahrain Society. We did a joint distribution of food boxes to the laborers. So we partially funded the food boxes. We paid for the sanitation items such as hand sanitizers. So here are all the boxes with our logos on it. There they are distributing the boxes to the laborers. Here's a food package, and here's a box with our logos. So just to update everyone, I'm planning a quiz night on 12th of May. The idea that all the clubs will come together will be, so we have 5 clubs, therefore 5 teams. Each team will have 3 to 4 team members. And the idea is that we'll have sort of like a fun quiz night, answering questions. There'll be like what I've done, I've taken a caption competition and missing words and everything. So it's going to be very interactive, not just questions, there'll be pictures and you have to guess what the picture is, what the news headline is. And it's going to be May 12th, 9:30. And then, so I finished all the announcements. I will introduce the speaker. I'm trying to unmute you. Okay, no, you're unmuted now. Just give me a second. I'm going to pull up your biography. Where did I put it? Just give me a sec. I do apologize. It's a very short biography. What happened to it? I don't see it now. I'll just pull up the other one then. Okay, this is oh wow.
Yeah, the one's too long. The
one on the email. Long, yeah. But what we've done, we our admin Sandra thought your biography was very short, so she went to your LinkedIn profile and copied and pasted, and she took that and she decided that picture was nicer on LinkedIn, the one you provided us for some reason. So what I'll do, I'll just read the first couple of lines. Mr. Farhaz Farouk is a chartered accountant by professional with over 25 years of progressive and extensive work experience for entry level to senior management. He was born in Sri Lanka, brought up in Saudi Arabia, educated in India with British curriculum. He is an award-winning Toastmaster, having excelled at speech contests up to the district level. He also have taken up different leadership roles, the communication and leadership skills gained from Toastmasters, and has a hobby of rugby. So please, Mr. Farouk, please, I will make you a host. So only you will have the ability to share. No, actually, it's better that I won't make you the host because I need to admin people while the talk's going. So please. The floor is yours.
I will not be able to share my screen
No,
otherwise.
no, you will be able to share. It's open to everyone.
No, it's
No?
screen sharing is disabled.
All right. I enable it. Try again, please.
All right, thank you. Oh, yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you. Excellent. So thank you so much, Rotary Club of Salmania, Club Secretary, Mr. Faisal Juma. Thank you for inviting me and for all the members for having me here. And I was given this task of speaking about the current crisis and how potential responses that could be or organizations and individuals could take, as well as resilience measures that could be adopted once this whole thing comes under control and as we move on to the next level of getting back to normal. So I put together a small deck which will be presented now, based on the little bit of experience that I have gained over the past few weeks working with my organization on managing this crisis, as well as certain crises that did take place in the past and how all of that information and knowledge was brought together. So here it goes. What I propose to do is, and I've been given about 10 to 15 minutes of time, I'll spend a bulk of that time on the presentation talking about the response mechanism, the resilience models, and so on. And once we finish that, perhaps we can open the floor for a few questions, and then maybe we could actually have a discussion around what has been presented. And hopefully we can nicely wrap it all up with some kind of a action plan at the end towards closer to the 15-minute mark. Now, when we talk about crisis management, and COVID-19 is a crisis, essentially what is important is how we jump into action and what our immediate responses to the crisis are. Based on what I thought was important, I have listed out 4 areas in which, as organizations, as business leaders, as individuals, we should be thinking of when it comes to responding to a crisis. I put HR as the first point, and there's a reason for it. Human resources, our staff, are the key function, are the key component of any organization. And if the staff are looked after during this period, we can rest assured that the rest of the organization's activities are going to take place. What does it mean when we talk about human resources? We are to look after their health, their safety, their hygiene factors if they are supposed to get into work for whatever reason, and also make them aware of what this whole crisis is about, how this crisis could be managed from a personal point of view. What are the terms? Now, if you take COVID, for instance, as an example, what are the precautionary measures that they should take? Like, say, for instance, why don't you cover yourself, take care, use protective gear, cover your hands, perhaps. Things like this could be made aware to them. In addition, the other thing that's important when it comes to human resources is the protocol, the working protocol. Do we expect all of them to continue to come to work, of course, depending on whatever number of hours that we have discussed? Or are there different protocols? Like, say, for instance, are we encouraging working from home? HR is first and foremost the most important thing that we need to look at, and these are the different aspects that we need to think about and communicate to them. The next thing that's important in a response phase is the finances of the organization. And when I say finances, we have to look at the overall aspect. Generally, what happens in a crisis situation is everybody tries to hold on to their money, hold on to their cash. How would an organization respond to this? How do we keep promoting our business, keep running our business and generating revenue? That's one. But generating revenue is just part of the package. How do we collect the dues? How do we actually collect the cash? That's important as well. So that's one aspect of finances. The other aspect of finances, and I personally, being an accountant, I think very important is how do we contain or curtail the costs or the expenses of running the organization. And that's key. When things were normal, organizations have a certain spend, a certain way of conducting itself. But when things get a little tight, what are those expenses that should be looked at? What are those expenses that cannot be avoided? And what are the expenses that could be avoided? These decisions have to be made at a very early stage so that at the end of the day, we try as much as possible to curtail the expenses only to what's absolutely needed and make sure that we generate sufficient cash to meet those. Tiding over a crisis is important, and cash flow management is a key factor in that. The next thing that comes to response mechanism are the facilities that are required to run the organization. Now, say for instance, if you take my home country, Sri Lanka, where my employee is currently based, that country is in complete lockdown. Nobody can leave their homes. But my organization is still functioning because what we did was we implemented work from home protocol. And in relation to that, what are the facilities that were needed? Those were provided to staff. Say, for instance, uninterrupted or reliable internet connections. Of course, we were supposed to procure it, but the organization was willing to bear the cost of it. Things like equipment. Uh, those who had their own equipment were encouraged to use it, of course, but those who didn't have their own equipment, they were provided with company sponsored laptops and what have you, so that they they are able to continue to work and continue to do what they're supposed to do as far as each of their functions are concerned. When it also when we talk about lockdown situations, that is another matter that we looked at when it got to facilities, and that was obtaining regulatory or government passes if any of the employees had to leave home and actually go to their workplace or go and meet clients or customers for any reason. So those permits were also obtained. The company facilitated that. So that was part of the facilities. And last but not least, in order to get all of these together, we needed to have a strong and robust procurement function. The supply chain had to be good. Uh, it's not normal for organizations to plan for this kind of unprecedented crisis. So we didn't really have like 150 laptops to give out to all of our staff. But what we did have was relationships with our suppliers, and that helped us to get the 150 laptops that were needed at short notice. So what I'm trying to get at is procurement and the supply chain has to be good, sound, and the relationships between the organization and the suppliers also in a very healthy position, so that when as we say, the brown stuff, the proverbial brown stuff hits the fan, we are able to go to them and call upon that relationship and say, please help us, we need so and so, and they are only willing to, more than willing to help out. So that's the response phase. Now, that's generally the first 4 to 6 weeks, 8 weeks. That's what happens during that time. But that's not the end all. We need to look at coming out of this whole problem. And for that, we need to look at resilience. We need to look at what are the next phases, uh, next phase that we need to look at. And in that sense, most countries, most jurisdictions actually provided certain relief measures, and all businesses should keep their eyes open for such relief measures. It could be in the form of tax breaks for countries that do have taxes. It could be in the form of reduced fees or no fees when it came to things like employment related fees and what have you, or company related fees. In addition, certain governments also gave grants. So keep our eyes open for those things, because those will all help us in getting back to normal. The other thing to look at, uh, dear Rotarians, is what opportunities does this crisis present? Now, say for instance, let me take an example from where I work. I currently work for an insurance organization, and what has happened is that we are, of course, one of the larger players in the market. And we find that there are some of the smaller players who seem to be not doing all that well when it comes to this crisis. So we think that's an opportunity for us to actually approach these, we would say, competitors, but they are not, because all of us are in this together, and volunteer to or offer that we would be able to work with them in order to help out in this particular process. And in the whole real idea behind this is perhaps see if we could take over part of their portfolio or take over part of their functions, and make it ours. So that was an opportunity we saw, which we are currently working on. And you never know, maybe 2-3 months down the line we may actually have an acquisition. Then we have to look at the threats for our respective organizations. It could be in the form of reduced orders, difficulty in procurement, staff not being able to come back to work. How do we manage all of those when normality resumes? Just because everything gets back to normal does not mean staff are going to rush back to work. Say, for instance, again, to take from my example, from my experience, my country, Sri Lanka, has said that only 1/3 of your staff can get back to office once we lift the lockdown. So what about the rest of the 2/3? Let us assume we want some of them to be back. Maybe they'll have second thoughts. No, we can't come. We are scared. We are worried about getting contaminated or infected. So these are threats for organizations, and those need to be thought about and managed. The other resilience factor that we need to think about is how possible it is to restructure our current business model to be ready for the future, as well as to also respond to any potential or any recurrence of this threat of the COVID-19 virus issues in the next few months. So how do we restructure our operations? We obviously cannot continue to work the way we have been working in the past, but how do we restructure? Does it need, is there any reorganization of necessary in terms of functions, changing the way things work, and how do we get towards normalization? So, dear Rotarians, response, resilience, these are step one and step two of crisis management. However, there is an important step in the overall crisis management formula, and that is what I call step zero, and which is how we get ready to face a crisis. In order to respond and in order to build up our resilience, we should have planned ahead. We should have been ready for it, and we should have been in some form or the other been able to quickly jump into it. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that we were able to predict the COVID-19 crisis and the way it hit the whole world. But what I'm trying to say is a crisis can happen, a crisis may happen. How ready was the organization to jump into action in order to get over this crisis? And for this, we need the governance structures in place. What are the committees? Who are the people that should be in the committee? What are the initial things that we could, essentially a step-by-step thing of how we are going to react. Now, my organization has something called the crisis management team, and it includes members from the different functions that are necessary in order to run. The objective of this team was to look at the risks, look at the issues, and make sure that we had adequate ammunition in place in order to face these risks or issues. The organization also, as part of preparedness, has to make sure that it's got its infrastructure in place should a crisis hit. And what do we mean by infrastructure? It is actually to have staff. Now, say, for instance, we were lucky. We had our staff already on work from home model before the crisis, not necessarily planning for the crisis, but as a matter of convenience, because sometimes people just cannot come, transport issues, whatever. So we allowed them to work from home. So it was a question of having that infrastructure and multiplying it. And of course, training all the staff on what we should do as initial response and resilience and so on. And this was all part of the readiness. And this is what I call stage zero of crisis management. One thing that runs across all these stages is communication. There has to be clear communication during the readiness phase, getting ready phase. There has to be clear communication in the response phase, and there has to be clear communication in the resilience phase. And I'm not simply saying communicating with just internally among us. It is internally within the organization, different hierarchical levels, as well as external with the regulators, with the statutory bodies, and so on. That is something that should run across the whole thing. So essentially, just to put it in 3 steps, we need to be ready, we need to be respond, and we need to recover. And that's essentially what the crisis management is all about. And essentially, each of these steps, the first step is a preventive measures. We just try to see how things could be prevented. The next step is we react to what happens, and the third one is the curative, where we fix things and move on so that we could come back or come back stronger. Now, fellow dear Rotarians, COVID-19, if you look at this timeline, hit us now. But COVID-19, yes, it's serious, it's unprecedented, it's a pandemic, but it's not the first crisis that hit us. People who have been in the business world will know that we have been hit by crisis after crisis. This one is a health crisis. We have had natural crises like the tsunamis, like earthquakes. Then we have had financial crises like the famous global financial crisis of about 10 years, 12 years back. And this kept on hitting us. And the bad news is COVID-19 is certainly not the last crisis to hit us. This is just going to happen. Organizations, if they wish to be successful, if they wish to be resilient, have to look at doing this over and over and over again. Be ready. Crisis hits us. Let's respond. Once the initial response is done, let's think of how do we get back to normal, the resilience, and then we get back to being ready for the next crisis. And this cycle has to keep going on and on. And that is essentially the message with which I would like to leave all of you today. My time is up. I would like to open the floor if there are any questions. And at this stage, let me hand over the control of the administration back to our administrator, and and just bear with me a minute while I figure that out.
If you can just you can unshare.
Okay.
Just
yes.
go back to the green button on the bottom.
Green button on the bottom. Okay, gotcha.
And try to unshare.
Okay, got it.
Oh, okay, good. Right.
Excellent. And now let me. Oh, you're still host. So brilliant. So now I open the floor for any discussions, questions.
Yes. So before we start questions, I have the same request as last week. If everyone can take their phones and take a selfie of themselves, so as usual, I'll make the video, our video. And Mr. Farouk, can you please join us in the selfie?
I will certainly do that.
Just take a picture of yourself with the computer behind you. So the idea I'll incorporate into our video and into the Good.
Done.
So what as last week, if people can just type in their questions in the chat, and I'll read through them. All right, so nobody seems I think you've done a very good job.
It's either that or it's Ramadan has taken over, is it?
All right, so generally, so based on your talk, Osama Al-Maid would like to thank the speaker.
Thank you so much, sir.
So your talk basically, you mentioned that you have to prepare. What's this? Okay, I'll just ask my question really quickly while everybody else is typing their questions down. You're saying that we should prepare like for future, because you mentioned briefly at the end that there might be other crises happening. So what sort of precautions? I mean, do you think this situation is teaching us a lesson and how to prepare ourselves for the future?
Indeed, and this is not the first such opportunity we got to learn that lesson. In fact, I mean, I have I have personally seen the 2008 global financial crisis really hit us badly. A few years before that, we had the Asian tsunami and the crisis that followed that. And there was a mini financial crisis a few years before that. And uh, of course, these are much more localized. There would have been earthquakes that hit organized countries, and therefore, it affected operations. If you remember the Fukushima, the famous Japanese earthquake, which really literally wiped out part of Japan, and then the crisis that the automobile industry, for example, went through. Crises are a part of life. It just keeps coming. It just keeps hitting us. Each crisis effectively helps us to think about what we are going to do, what we can do as an immediate measure, and what we should be doing in order to come out of the crisis, and how do we kind of refocus, reorganize, and ourselves, because end of the day, organize things will change as a result of the crisis. Now, certainly with COVID-19, what's going to happen is it's not going to be the same again. It's a totally different world out there. People are not going to even shake hands. We are going to have lots of issues having face-to-face meetings. How do we plan for that? Customers, if our sales calls are probably not going to be face-to-face anymore, or not as much as we would like, how do we plan for such things? How do we close those deals? Are we going to essentially, lots of things are probably going to take place in mediums such as these, or on more traditional ones like our phones and so on. How do we plan for those? Also, businesses that cater to like say a high consumer kind of a thing, like say for instance clothing, perhaps food is probably a bad example because I think everybody is buying food from out these days, but things like clothing, even automobiles for instance, are we going to continue to run those businesses in the same way we had run? Like again, a case in point, one of the main garments manufacturers in Sri Lanka, which is like a top manufacturer, and it manufactures on behalf of some of the biggest names in the world, has announced a 60% reduction in operations, and almost all their staff have been asked to take pay cuts across the board as a measure of wading through this tough time. So each business has to look at what they are doing. Each business has to see if the products and services that we are providing currently are going to be in demand once the world gets back to normal, and how do we get about satisfying that demand if it exists.
Okay, that's thank you very much. Yusuf Fakhro, he asks, when do you expect your business to operate normally, if there's such a thing as normal?
I guess anybody's guess is as good as mine on this one, specifically in relation to our current crisis. Of course, thankfully, what I can see is lots of countries seem to have not necessarily flattened the curve, but they seem to be on the downward trend as far as infections are concerned, and seem to be implementing measures to get out of these lockdown situations and trying to return to some kind of normalcy, which is a good thing. However, I'm sure almost all jurisdictions, almost all authorities will be taking a lot of precaution, and they will not necessarily open up the countries and businesses in a big hurry completely as the way we were. It's probably going to be measured. It's probably going to be very controlled, because the last thing our countries would want after having successfully controlled or combated this COVID-19 problem is to see a resurgence of it. And sometimes, sadly, the resurgence could be worse than the initial. So I'm sure the authorities have that in mind. So to answer the question, when will things get back to normal? It's at least until we get a vaccine that works and is in mass production. This particular crisis is not going to be in getting back to normal anytime soon. What we can see is a partial return to normalcy, followed by perhaps a ramping up, step-by-step ramping up of operations until we see a complete eradication of this virus. But until that, there is no such thing as normal. All what I can say is at each step of the ramp up, that's the new normal, if you agree. And what do we do with that new normal? is what organizations need to think about. The success of our resilience measures will be measured based on what we do at each of these new normals.
Okay. Next question from Fareed Bedr. Thank you for your presentation. Being an accountant, how the financial system will be affected post-pandemic?
It's the financial systems are indeed already affected. As we have seen, there has been a huge reduction in interest rates. We see that one of the main commodities of the world, which is oil, has taken a big beating, but of course there are other surrounding reasons for that. Now, what's going to happen is, and also one more factor that we need to take into account is lots of governments are providing relief measures and they are providing a lot of financial incentives and so on to to countries, to their citizens, to their organizations. All of these are going to have a very long-term impact on the financial markets, on finance itself. That coupled with human psychology, whereby when the moment we see uh, a problem, the moment we look at a crisis, our tendency is to hold, watch and wait, watch and see. We generally wouldn't go around spending. I mean, same with me. I'm stuck here in Singapore and I'm very frugal with my spending these days because I don't know how much longer I'll be stuck here before Sri Lanka opens up and I can go back. So, and I'm talking of it from a very micro level, but I'm sure even at a much more macro level, everybody will think about how to safeguard the assets that we currently have, the resources that we currently have, and so on. Now, with this kind of a framework, whereby we have markets coming down, commodities not being required, as well as the mentality of individuals and companies to safeguard resources, it goes without saying that this is going to lead to a shrinkage in finance, a very significant shrinkage, and the extent to which this shrinkage can be managed will decide who is going to successfully wade over this tide and who is probably or unfortunately going to be swallowed by the tide.
Okay. A question from Dr. Harb. In virtual consultation, how can we collect our money from clients in Saudi Arabia where there's no benefit like Bahrain? Doctor, did I ask your question correctly? Doctor, you're online.
Yes, because the problem is very important. He started the first thing he started. He said that how to collect the money and how to collect your things on virtual activities. Now, I decided to do a virtual. I did not yet, but I decided to do it. The problem with Bahrain is easy. We have benefits. We can register it, and we are in the process. I think within next week it will be. We have it. But the Saudis, they don't have these facilities. So how can I get my consultation, a virtual consultation? I'm a medical, by the way, but dermatologist, consultant dermatologist. What is the system that people collect money from other places, like GCC, for example, the Gulf, not only from Saudi, from other areas, or maybe international. If it succeeded, I will do it international. I like it. So what's your opinion?
Doctor, thank you for that question. And I believe there are existing applications, existing facilities globally which could facilitate the collection of consultation fees or indeed money from outside. Say, for instance, we could first of all use the banking system and see if your patient is willing to do a bank-to-bank transfer. That's one. Let us assume that isn't possible. I guess the easiest way to probably get about getting your payment would be, and I don't know if it's available in Saudi Arabia, would be to use something like PayPal. That's available. It's a virtual network, and that's how lots of people kind of do transactions. Like I do some virtual consultation myself as well as a bit of a side, uh, like a bit of a moonlighting session. And what I do is I collect fees that are due to me using my PayPal account, and that works very conveniently. Yeah, so I guess that's something that you could use, doctor. It's easy, it's simple, it just gets added to our credit card, it's linked to that, and so it facilitates a lot of things. So I would recommend something simple as that. A bank-to-bank transfer is perhaps the best, but if you would like to just keep it simple, maybe use PayPal or something similar, some similar thing.
Yeah, I think that's quite reasonable. Sri, I think Sri is joining us from Delhi, I think. I think you're joining us from Delhi, is that correct, Sri?
Mumbai.
Mumbai, sorry, Mumbai.
Okay.
He says, hello to everyone about Ramadan Kareem. How soon air travel will begin?
I hope I knew the answer to that question, Mr. Sri, because I would be the first guy on a plane going back to Colombo. But jokes apart, I have been seeing some positive trends. For instance, Etihad Airlines has announced that they would be starting operations, well, not probably to the full extent, but certain operations by the 15th of May. I know Qatar Airways is continuing its operations in a curtailed manner. They are doing lots of ferrying flights, moving people from country to country if they want to just move. So they are continuing. There are organizations, airline organizations that are doing mercy flights. So air travel is taking place in a bit of a limited way. But the good news was when I read about Etihad saying that they will recommence operations on the 15th of May. And that's a good sign. Etihad is a global airline. It is one of the leading airlines, and I'm sure Emirates will follow suit. And it's a matter of time before it starts back. However, that is assuming the airports around the world have made arrangements to welcome passengers in the new COVID era. And when I say welcome passengers in the new COVID era, do they have adequate testing facilities in the airport? Do they have disinfection facilities in the airport? Do they have quarantine, if that is necessary, such facilities in the airport? Do they have the infrastructure to issue stay-at-home notices and so on? So that is a big if. If that infrastructure gets ready, and no sooner that infrastructure gets ready, my personal feeling is that air travel would start.
Good. Yusuf Fakhro, he asks, in insurance, how are you treating force majeure clauses?
This has been I mean, practically also we did face a few such cases currently, but what's happened is insurance companies, and specifically even places like my employer, what we did was we actually used this crisis as a good PR tool. And let me try to explain. For people who had life covers, uh, and generally communicable disease are not covered in life covers in where I come from. But what we did was we said COVID-19 is going to be exempt from this exemption. In other words, in case in the event somebody contracted COVID-19 and suffers because of that, we actually threw in an extra payment. So there are two ways we could look at force majeure. One is we could look at it negatively. The other one is we can look at it positively. So the example I'm giving is, though this was unprecedented, what we did was we used it as a good PR exercise, and we gave it out to all of our life insurance holders, policy holders. We said, in the event, God forbid, if we don't want it to happen, but if you do get hit by COVID-19, we're actually throwing an extra cover to you, and these are the benefits that you would get. It could personal cover, it could be a hospitalization cover, and so on. So we threw all of that in. However, there are also certain insurance policyholders who use such crises in a negative manner. And again, a case in point, practical example, all of a sudden there was a fire in, and fire is the best example of insurance fraud. There was a fire out of the blues in one of our clients' workshops. And we were very careful when it came to entertaining such claims. So we had to send our engineers into the place. We had to send the government analysts into the place just to make sure everything was kosher and there was no foul play. Out of the 3 fires that were reported, we paid 1 claim and the other 2 are pending because those are quite doubtful. So that's how companies have to handle. So to answer the question specifically, treat every case on a case-by-case basis, because we are currently in very unprecedented situations. However, if we could use this current crisis to our benefit, go ahead and use that as well, because nothing better than a good PR in such a time. People will remember that we looked after them at the time of need.
Good.
Back to you.
I think we have one more question from Dr. Dhafar. Please, you're online, doctor. Go ahead.
Mr. Farhaz, thank you very much for an extensive presentation. I just wonder whether the crisis you're talking about is like all the other crises that you have mentioned. You know, I think this is the mother of crisis. It's not like all the other crises that we are all stuck in our homes. So this is not a normal crisis. We can't go out, we cannot breathe, we cannot operate, we cannot do anything. Don't tell me that what we're doing now is healthy. And Bahraini culture taught us how we should meet each other, we should see each other, we should sit together, we should communicate better face to face. So not even an economic crisis or even a weather crisis or any other crisis is equal to what we are really facing. So I think this crisis, we don't know how we're going to get out of it. We hope we will get out of it safely. But even when we get out of it, it's going to be a whole new world order in front of us to deal with, not like the one we used to before. Thank you.
100% agree, Your Excellency, Dr. Dafar. This is the mother of all crises. It's totally unprecedented. People have been stuck at home for weeks. And as I said, even after the lockdowns are over, lots of people will not want to get out of their homes for obvious reasons. In fact, I was telling my wife, even if we get back to Sri Lanka and the country gets back to normal and my boss says, Farhaz, can you come to office? I'm going to tell him, if you don't mind, can I work from home for another 2 weeks? That's the way it is, because that's the nature of the beast we are dealing with. So this is not, as you rightly said, this is not like any of the other crises. This is totally unprecedented. And at times like this, we need to really put our thinking hats on to see how we can move forward. We have made sure, just a few examples from experience, we have made sure that our staff who are coming back to work are completely as protected to the extent possible. We have given, we have made sure that there's hygiene and sanitization facilities at the point of entry. There's going to be temperature taken. People have been discouraged from using the lifts. Customers are not going to be allowed to just roam around the office. There's going to be a waiting area. Meetings in office are curtailed. Even within office, if I have to speak to my colleague in the next room, earlier we could just walk around and just have this face-to-face quick chat. No, we are telling them just do it, pick the phone up, speak to them, try as much as possible not to go. So it's measures like this that we have to take. It's a total change of mindset that's necessary. I'm not in any way suggesting that we should change the way we live. No, I understand, Dr. Dafar, because we also, humans are social animals. We need this social interaction. And I guess one of the successes of Zoom is because of the need for us to have this social interaction. However, unfortunately, the nature of the beast is that it's a very contagious virus. It can jump, it can infect people very quickly, very easily. So we need to take those precautions, and I'm sure over time we will get used to it. I'm sure if I go around the screen over here, most of us have now got used to opening doors with our elbows as against the previous way of opening it with our palms, and that's a new norm. We are probably going to use our backs to open doors a lot more than earlier it probably would have been considered offensive, but now that's what needs to be done. We will probably need to keep covering our faces when we go out in public. And I know there was a time, there were countries that banned the use of face covers. Things have changed, and that's the new norm. And I guess the sooner we understand that this is the new norm, these are the new steps that need to be taken. And I'm sure humans being civil creatures who have worked on civilization from the time we were in caves up to now, we will learn the new norm, and we will work in the way that it's supposed to be. So thank you for that thing. Yes, this is the mother of all crisis, and I hope we don't get anything worse than this, but we really need to learn, unlearn, and relearn as we go along.
Thank you.
Well said. So it looks like we have no more questions, so I think I can conclude the meeting. Just a couple of things. I think we have a guest from the Toastmasters, Husni Amin. I believe you're a guest from the Toastmasters Allied Bahrain. You're on, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Faisal. Yes, I'm from Allied Bahrain Toastmasters Club. I'm the president, where Farhaz Farouk is a member. Thank you very much for inviting us and giving us the opportunity.
And thank you very much for helping me find a speaker last minute. A couple of my other
Most
speakers
welcome.
cancelled on me. So,
It was a pleasure. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
I just want to thank
Anytime.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good. So I think we can conclude the meeting today. As I mentioned, yeah. So I think thank you very much, Mr. Farouk. I hope you get back to Colombo very soon.
Thank you so much. I hope so too.
But Singapore is quite nice anyway. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Bye.
Thank you.